Blame is the opposite of responsibility. Responsibility looks to seek how you are involved in the cause and effect equation. And if you figure that out, and I should say when, because you're always involved in the cause and effect equation, ultimately that's not a question. Everything that has ever happened in this world, we are all somehow involved with.
All right, that's the leader of the self-help group called Nxivm. His name is Keith Raniere. He's just a day away from learning whether he will spend the rest of his life in prison. He was convicted last summer of federal crimes, including sex trafficking of children, extortion, conspiracy to commit forced labor. I think they threw some RICO in there, racketeering. Officials say Raniere used Nxivm to recruit partners in a sex cult and made himself rich in the process. His followers included some rich and famous people like actress Allison Mack from TV Smallville and an heir to the huge Seagram's liquor company. Some of the victims are expected to deliver hours of impact statements during his sentencing tomorrow. Our affiliate, WPIX in New York, has a quick look at how this scandal exploded.
Emails like this are how Allison Mack and other top members of the alleged sex cult Nxivm would apparently operate and recruit their victims. Friendly chats asking potential new members to meet in intimate settings would seem innocent enough, but now we know much more thanks to a federal complaint.
You don't realize you're getting them, but the impression wells within you, wow, he's angry.
It's all a fake and phony camouflage. It's all a situation where the person goes in with eyes open and everyone seems very nice and very supportive, but they're really there to be entrapped.
A source tells Pix 11 exclusively she was almost a victim of Nxivm's dark world of sex slaves. She shared this exchange she had with Mack initially back in 2012, a time our source says was a vulnerable point in her life. Mack discussed with the former journalist the role of women in media and said she was looking for strong-voiced and fearless women to lead the charge in changing female perception and presence for good. Mack, our source says, was persistent in emails and would even call for friendly conversations, but wanted the woman to attend a weekend retreat with a price tag of more than $500. All of this under the guise of a women's empowerment getaway. This email shows you the very beginning stages of how somebody is recruited into a so-called cult?
It can happen so easily. We're all looking to belong. We're all looking to connect with people that we feel would be supportive, that can help us.
All right, as I said, Raniere will be sentenced tomorrow, and last Friday, a judge denied his motion for a new trial, which his attorneys filed a week ago. That motion, based in part on affidavits that two of Raniere's followers filed with the court alleging that the government, the federal government, intimidated them and prevented them from testifying on his behalf. Let me read part of one of those affidavits. This comes from Nicole Klein, who was, I guess, a follower. In her affidavit, she laid out how she felt threatened by prosecutors. She says, with less than a month until Mr. Raniere's trial, I received a grand jury subpoena. According to her attorney, Mr. Sapone, when he called lead prosecutor Ms. Penza regarding the subpoena immediately after receiving it, she made the following chilling statement, quote, first, we are going to cut the head of the snake off, and then we're coming for the body. This is not going away for her. At this point, although I desired to testify due to what I perceived as a retaliatory threat coupled with their grand jury subpoena, my lawyer advised me not to testify, and I complied. Let's bring back in the think tank. And by the way, Steve Greenberg is very familiar with the feds over in New York. Are they playing dirty here, Steve?
Well, I mean, the feds do what the feds want to do. I don't doubt that those statements may have been made, but I read the judge's opinion, and essentially what he said was, this wasn't newly discovered evidence. This was information you could have learned during the trial. He really didn't make a judgment as to the merits of the allegations. Prosecutors have tremendous power, and the most powerful thing that they have is the ability to tell somebody, look, you might still get in trouble. That has a chilling effect. And that's just the reality of life. Here, I think that they had a lot of other evidence. It probably wouldn't have made much of a difference. My guess is that the government had all sorts of things to use to impeach these women if they had testified. But this is just how things work. I'm not gonna editorialize on the Eastern District beyond that.
Not with a pending case, and I respect that, but we're not going to talk about it. What I want to do, Aramis, I want to read another affidavit here. I want to get the prosecutor's perspective on whether or not you think they're playing fair here in these allegations. This is follower Michelle Hatchett, who also touched on what she said was a threat of perjury. She said that when I refused to adopt the government's view of my experience with Mr. Raniere and my time in DAS, DAS is part of this Nxivm. The government continued to press me to change my account of events by showing me communications that Mr. Raniere appeared to have with another person. In particular, the government asked me to read the passages where Mr. Raniere makes reference to a sex toy. So, is this fair? Is there anything to this? Is this standard operating procedure?
Well, it's going to depend. I think there's a lot of information that isn't there. How many previous statements have been made? Has she changed her story in the state? The government in this case decided that one fit the consistent message or the consistent narrative of the prosecution, and now she's trying to change it. The timing of any changes in the statements, the conflict in the evidence, all the things that the court will have to consider, it is up to the government to consider on the front end. So whether or not it is legitimate has to be seen in the larger picture of what prior statements were made and what the larger realm of the evidence is. And just like, Steve mentioned a minute ago, when you're looking at a motion for a new trial, the court made it very clear in the order that if it doesn't have a basis to think that he would not have otherwise been convicted, then there's no granting of the new trial. So whether or not you think that the state is being disingenuous, genuine, or something else, the bottom line is that there isn't a basis based upon the evidence to think that he would be otherwise not guilty and should still be convicted.
All right, Mark Iglars, let's talk about this guy. He's like a self-help guru, right? He's facing a lot of time. He set it up maybe as some sort of an alleged pyramid scheme or multi-level marketing, depending upon your point of view, right? And he's charging thousands of dollars. I mean, if people want self-help, I mean, for $15, they can go on Amazon and order Be Happy by Choice, the book written by self-help guru Mark Iglars, right?
Right, and I'm so happily married, and I would never
And you
have
don't
a
have to
woman
have
brand.
sex with them.
That's right. They wouldn't brand ME on them either way. In all seriousness, this guy is very troubled, and he used vulnerable women to get what he wanted. And 15 years on the low end is way too short of a time for what he did. I mean, he victimized the most vulnerable of women. And I don't blame the prosecutors, by the way, for sometimes taking a defense witness and at least opening up their eyes and saying, look, we know what happened. You're going to get up on the witness stand. Let me tell you what's going to happen if you do so. Here's some of the evidence that we have which suggests that you are not being truthful. And if you're not being truthful, you could face perjury charges. There's a fine line between prosecutors trying to get a witness to not commit a criminal offense and prosecutors intimidating witnesses, which is something that they've done in the past with some of my cases. In this case, I think they were probably doing them a favor, letting them know, listen, we know you're full of it. Don't go there.
Steve, I'm going to read one more part of one of the affidavits. And again, this is from Michelle Hatchett again. This was a clear threat that if I took the stand as a defense or government witness without first coming into the U.S. Attorney's Office a third time and further proffering with the prosecution, the government would charge me with perjury. Can you explain for folks at home how it works when the feds are investigating cases and talking to witnesses and getting these proffers? How does that work?
Sure, they've got different categories that they put people in. They've got targets and subjects and people who are just intended to be witnesses. Typically, if you're just a witness, they'll just reach out to you. They'll tell you you don't need a lawyer. But most people, if you're smart, you get what's called a proffer letter, which is a letter that says that they won't use what you say in that meeting against you. It's like use immunity for what you say in that meeting. That doesn't mean if they don't find out this information some other way, they can't use it against you. So the example I usually give people is if I tell them that, I committed a crime with Mark, and I tell them all about that crime. And then they go out and they talk to Mark, and Mark decides that he's going to also tell them all about that crime. They may be able to use that statement or something they find out down the road from Mark against me. But typically the prosecutors don't do that. Typically they want people to come in and proffer, tell them the truth. And if they tell them the truth and they're not one of the main players in the investigation, they usually can convert themselves from a subject of the investigation to a witness. If you're a target of the investigation, in other words, if you're one of the primary players, you're never going to help yourself by proffering unless you're flipping against someone else.
Aramis, let me ask you,
Fed
Aramis.
101.
Yep, Aramis, let me ask you, because I was a state prosecutor and handled some federal cases as well, but not as a prosecutor. On the dark side, Steve and Mark, for
Stop it. Objection.
Just a little bit. But there was such a difference in the way things were done. What we just heard Steve describe, is that done at all down in Florida with the state attorney's offices around the state?
Well, generally speaking, I mean, the way that he articulated is more in the federal system because they are building their cases prior to the filing of an indictment and figuring out who's testifying. By the time the state system gets all of our cases, the investigation has been complete. And but for additional tasking by prosecutors in order to prepare for trial, there will not be additional evidence that we will disclose for discovery. So we're kind of building the plane while we're flying, if you will, versus in the federal system. So therefore, there may be some of that work at the investigative level, but that is before it reaches the intake stage at our office.
Yeah, the other difference between the state prosecutors and the federal prosecutors is state prosecutors will try a case without 5 videotapes of the crime, 3 audio taped confessions, right? And 2 people flipping on the person you're trying. They'll actually try a case without a complete guarantee. All right.
Vinny, we try cases when we don't have victims in domestic violence cases. So there you go with that.
Exactly. That's why I tend to have more respect for the state prosecutors, and people kind of get that when they watch the show.